What is good, you guys? You're here with Nate. This is Crossbeats Production, and thank you for tuning in. First off, for a bit of housekeeping, I want to say thank you for everybody who watches this channel. I do appreciate a lot, and I appreciate everybody who subscribes, likes, and hits the notification bell, because anything that comes through AdSense is pretty much the only way I get paid for YouTube videos. And if you're aware of AdSense, it doesn't really pay you that much. So I just want to say thank you for everybody who likes the videos and all that sort of good stuff. So let's get into the tutorial and talk about what would I do if I had Tupac's vocals to mix. Luckily enough, I have somebody who sounds a lot like Tupac in this particular track. It's not Tupac himself, but you'll soon find out that it sounds a lot like him. And I'm going to show you guys how I mixed the vocal and how I went through this entire mix. Actually, I'm going to break this down into a couple of parts in a series. I did start this a while ago with stock plugins, but there's a mixture of stock and also third-party plugins inside of this mix. So I might try and do it with stock plugins later on. But for now, I'll show you exactly how I achieved this mix, and we'll show you the vocals now. So let's have a listen to the track, see what it sounds like, and work from there. And I'll show you what I did to the vocals, why I did it, and you know, kind of what it's achieved. So let's go.
Created in this image and made by its likeness. Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown her sorrows in the gin. Father absent from the home as a young girl growing.
Okay, so as you can hear with the vocal, it does sound pretty good. Vocals are up front. Everything sort of sounds really well balanced. And I'm going to show you how I achieved that inside of the mix later on. And there's also something else I want to do, which I'll share with you guys. It's kind of something I want to do for the future for a website and all that sort of stuff with some products I want to sell. But we'll get into that in another future tutorial. So let's get into the mix and how I went about mixing this vocal, what I did, and how I achieved it. First off, let's minimize that, and we'll go into the vocal section, and I'll show you. This is in blue here, so I've color coded it in blue. I've labeled it MPG 2, 3, and 1. So 1, 2, and 3. That's kind of makes sense, so that I know kind of where things are at all times in the mix. I know what to look for as far as color. So each thing has got its own color code. The pink vocal is kind of the female vocal, and then all the rest. So it's kind of good to just color code things and kind of label it so you know where you are. So first off, the main vocal here, I'll just play that to you so you can hear it. And I'll leave all the effects on there first, and then I'll play it without it so you can kind of hear what's been done as well. So let's go.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown her sorrows in the gin. Father absent from the home as a young girl growing up.
So you can kind of hear there's a tiny bit of plate reverb there in the background. The vocal sounds quite clean. It doesn't have too much low end, all that sort of stuff. Let's have a listen to it with the ad-lib.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown her sorrows in the gin.
Now the ad-lib's there. It's not taking over the main vocal when it comes in, and it's kind of to the right. And now let's have a listen to sort of a double for that.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown her sorrows in the gin.
Now what I've done here with the vocal double, I'll just take off this. I'll just solo the double part.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within.
Now you can kind of hear obviously it's to the left, the ad-lib's to the right. So I'm using the double as like something on a filler on the left-hand side, so it kind of makes it a bit of ear candy. Then the ad-lib comes in and hits the right-hand side, so it hits your ear on the right. Adds a little bit of ear candy again, and then the main is right down the center, so you can kind of hear that.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless.
Now, with the vocal, if I wasn't putting any effects on here, I'll just show you without all the effects. I'll just highlight these three, take off every single effect here, and show you what it sounds like without any of the effects on there.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown her sorrows in the gin.
Now you can kind of hear there's already some sort of a delay on the vocal. So when it was recorded, obviously they've recorded it with that effect on there, and it's been bounced out, and that's how they wanted the vocal to sound. So I had to work with that. Sometimes that's an issue when you're trying to correct issues where they put too much reverb or whatever delay or whatever's on the vocal. If you don't want that, sometimes it can be an issue, but in this case it kind of worked really well for the track, so that's fine. The main vocal here, I believe that kind of sounded a little bit dry, so let's just isolate that. Undo this, undo that.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless, not a lot of.
So you can kind of hear that's kind of how that is if I solo this.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless.
So it is what it is. So that's what I get to work with. That's how I go. So when I was looking at that, I was thinking, okay, I don't need too much reverb because I've already kind of got a bit of a reverb / delay going on that track already. But it does need some effects on there, so I worked with what I had. So first off, what I did with the vocal is I used compression on the vocal. The compressor is set here. It's a stock compressor, so if you want me to copy these kind of settings for you guys, I might do that and show you guys how I kind of achieved it anyway. So let's go to the compressor, have a look at that. I'll turn it on. So first off, the compressor's got quite a high ratio because I'm looking at catching any peaks that kind of step out of place. There's not a whole lot on this because it already had some kind of compression already put on the vocal when I got it. But you see here, there is a little bit of variance as far as the height of the actual track with this vocal. So you get kind of peaks here and then it goes down to a lower bit. But it is what it is. It's kind of a really decent, I guess, level of compression on there already. So first off, I'll just play it with this compressor on there.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within.
Now, what I did to attack the vocal is I pretty much put 9, almost 10 to 1 ratio on there. No makeup gain, so I'm not using any makeup gain here. So it's all just, you can see there's no gain here, no input gain, there's no makeup gain, 100% mix. So it's all compression, and that's pretty much what's happening there. With the attack, I've got a 15 millisecond attack and a 120 release. It's on adaptive as well, so it kind of is adaptive to the detection speed there. So just bearing in mind, if I took that off, then it would be solid 120 and 15 milliseconds, but I'm leaving it adaptive because it sounds better. Just give me a sec. With this, I'm using this as more of a leveler, kind of like a limiter. And I'm using the threshold at just whatever it worked for the vocal. So 11 minus 11 was kind of where it started to hit the peak. And then it was compressing it by 9 dB. So 9 dB went in and only 1 dB came out. So anything that was above the threshold, if you understand compression, the compressor was working to limit some of that, the overs that were there. So for example, in reality, if you're looking at the vocal, for example, this section here, where it gets a little bit louder, you can kind of see there it would duck that down a bit and it would create a level that's more even inside the track, like a limiter. So that's what that compressor is first doing for me. It's not doing anything else. I'm not making up the gain. The knee's kind of set just to taste, and look ahead function set there. So it's allowing the compressor to detect any of the transients that come in and work with them from there. So that's what I was doing with the first compressor. The next thing here is another compressor. This is a Waves compressor, if you haven't seen it. So Waves make a compressor which allow for upwards and downwards compression at the same time. This compressor works really well, but you have to be really careful with it, especially if you don't know how to use it. It is like a simple sort of style. You can kind of see here it's got a dial, well not a dial, like a lever, and then another lever here for the high level. So you're allowed to obviously do upwards, downwards at the same time. And then obviously you take out the volume that it makes up, because it kind of, as far as I can tell, it does auto gain. So it is allowing some sort of auto gain there. So I'll just play the vocal with it on there. Actually, I'll turn it off and then leave it on after that.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown her sorrows in the gin. Father absent from the home as a young girl growing up. Mama left the struggle. All these strange men showing up. Angered as a child, when she's older, repeats the cycle. Searching for acceptance, not knowing it's really vital.
So you can kind of hear it does make a little bit of increasing gain, and that's kind of the vibe I was going for in this particular compressor anyway. But what I want to do is bring up some of the lower level stuff and also take down some of the top stuff just by a little bit. And then I brought that volume down by about minus 0.3. So that's kind of where that is working. It's working in two ways. So that's kind of the style that I want to go for. That is not a compulsory thing to have. You could use another compressor, just a stock one after that. But I feel like those Waves compressors, for example, this one, the MV2, is just really fast. It's creative because I don't have to think about it too much, and that saves me time and it helps me get it to a mix where I want to be faster. So next thing here is the REQ. The REQ is kind of an interesting EQ. It doesn't have any visual aspect to it, which sometimes I like that because I don't want to always just be looking at the meters and thinking, oh, I don't like the way that peak is there. I must reduce that because it's there. And I just feel like sometimes I do things I don't need to do when I can see things, rather than if I can't see what's happening, I just do what I hear and then I achieve things because of that. That's kind of a tip in a way, just listening, not paying attention to meters. Sometimes you just need to do that. It really does help you out. So EQ wise, we've got a high pass filter here, just removing that up to 82 Hertz. And the vocal already kind of had that on there, sort of. I felt like there wasn't too much low end. So if I just show you on the meter, I'll just bypass this. We'll just bring the spectrometer up here. We'll just show you that.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show.
They can kind of see this curve here. It kind of dips off a bit here. So something's happened with a high pass filter there already, but not dramatically. So if I just show you this with it on with the effects.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown us.
So it's really just removing then the low end frequency that I don't need there. The way you choose this, if you don't know how to look at low end, you can pretty much just do it using high pass, go to where it sounds like it's still natural and a little bit more than that, and then back it off to where it sounds natural to you. So kind of go more than you need and then just kind of slowly back it off till you feel like it sounds somewhat natural and that not too much is missing at the bottom. Because if you do, like for example, I'll just play it to you.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless.
That sounds like there's nothing there. It's just like a really high filter.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting.
So I bet 84 kind of really suited the track well. It was 82 when I first started. So anywhere, kind of in the natural sort of sounding realm, just go for that. That's kind of what I do when I'm mixing. It's just to try and remove the lows without making it sound like it's been removed type thing. So the other thing I've got here, the next filter is this one here, which is 1.5. That's kind of up there. I actually have these the other way around. That's just what happens when I do mixing. I don't know why. But anyway, I'll just start from the bottom here. So let's go with this filter here. So this filter is the one that I'm using right now. With the vocal, I wanted to have more of a mid-range, kind of lower mids for this vocal because it sounded like it needed it. And it's kind of that Tupac sort of vibe to that vocal as well. So I was working with that, and I'll just show you what it sounds like with and without.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown the sorrows in the gym.
So it gives it a bit more chest to the vocal. It really did help it achieve the sound that I wanted. Nothing drastic, just a little bit of extra oomph to the vocal. Next thing here is this filter here, which will just show you with and without. Luckily it's color coded because that way you can keep track of the little nodules there. I'll play it without.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown the sorrows in the gym. Father absent from the...
Now, I guess the question to you would be, how did I find these particular spots on the vocal and why am I choosing them? Mainly what you could do is either do one of two things, is dip out the EQ in that certain spot. So you get this nodule here, dip it out and see what you're missing. Or if you like to do what I do as well, is you can kind of just boost around here, not too high, but just a little bit, just kind of move it around so you can kind of feel what it's doing, hear it, and if it sounds right to you in the mix. Remember to kind of always do things in context as well. Don't always isolate it like what I'm doing right now. I'm just showing you what it sounds like because it's harder to interpret the full mix when you can't hear it. So let's have a listen to what it sounds like in the context of the mix, and I'll show you.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown the sorrows in the gym. Father absent from the home as a young girl growing up.
Now you can kind of hear what happened with the vocal when I moved it around here. This nodule, pretty much, I brought it up to here and it brought a lot of clarity to the vocal as well as just brightness. In a sense, that could work, but that's not kind of the vibe I was going for in this track. I could go back and redo it and think about it and, have a listen if it sounded right. I mean, work with it, whatever. But that's not kind of what I was going for in this particular track. And when I was listening to my headphones, I wanted to think about other things in the mix as well. For example, the hi-hats, the snare, and other instruments inside of it. So this is kind of what I ended up deciding to do. So I'll just show you that.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot.
Now, with this particular other part of the track, I've got this nodule here which is doing nothing. That's 0, so I don't really need that on. And the other thing I've got here is -2. So this nodule here is allowing some of that high-end frequency stuff around about 7 to be reduced. So taking out some of the S's, the high sibilances that I don't really need in there, just reducing some of that and working from there. It doesn't have to always be like this with the vocal. It's just that how they recorded it and how I wanted it to be in the mix is what I worked with. So let's play that with and without.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown the sorrows in the gin. Father absent from the home as a young girl growing up. Mama left to struggle all these strange.
So either way, I think either of those could have worked. It doesn't have to be without, but that's just what I decided to do at the time. Again, when you're listening to your track, don't just mix it and then think that's it. Mix it, get it to where you think you want it, and then come back to it maybe a day or two, even a week later, or even a year later. In this instance, I think this has been hanging around for a while, this track, but I really like this track and I wanted it to be right. So I was happy to wait, and the artist was happy to kind of wait in the sense because they have other tracks releasing, and it's going through a label, so I guess they were fine with that. But you really just have to think about it how from a perspective of fresh ears. Don't go in there and just do drastic stuff and then your ears get fatigued. You're not going to know what's going on after that. So it's definitely helpful to go in there and try and work with it after the fact and then re-listen to it, think about it, and then do what you need to do. So that's the EQ that I used on that part. The next thing here, the red one, is reducing some of that stuff around about 10K upwards. So using like a shelf type scenario. That's not what I was doing with the low pass. I didn't like that because it was cutting off too much of the high end stuff. So I used like a shelf type thing to get that off there. Again, something that didn't have to be done, but I just liked the way it sounded.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it. Drown the sorrows in the gin. Father absent.
Now, the reason why I choose to do these sort of things is I'm thinking of cumulative frequency build-up. So, for example, you get a lot of things with the drum kit, and this is kind of where vocals aren't just the easiest thing to mix into a track because you got so many elements inside the mix. You really have to think about each stage of the mix and working with each element and then fitting things together. But what I would try and aim to do is get your track to sound how you want it to sound, but also being mindful that you're having a vocal sit on it later on, or even whilst you're mixing it. You could do it within the whole entire mix, trying to get that to sit right. But I found in my career of mixing that getting a vocal on there at the end kind of really does help, because once you've got the track sitting, sounding right, and everything, all the elements sound right, generally that's how you want the track to sound anyway. So you've just then got to figure out where you're going to put the vocal in there and what things you can reduce after the fact. So I feel like mixing a track and then thinking about the vocal on top of it kind of works for me. It may not work for you, but sometimes if you're trying to mix all the elements together, then you're throwing the vocal in there as well. It really does make it difficult to try and work with. In your gain staging, I guess in that sense, put it all together, work with it all together. But I would usually try and work with the drums first, or at least the kick, the snare, the three main elements of the track. And then if that's the vocal, throw the vocal in there as part of the gain staging at the start as one of the most important parts. So, okay, with the vocal then, what I've got here, I'll just show you the reverb sends that I've got on this vocal as well. I've got one plate reverb, which I'm going to do a review on this plate reverb as well, and just show you what that is. So the plate is PA1, which this has been around for a little bit now. I did a review on this in the past, and since then they've done updates to the actual plate reverb as well. So I really like the way it sounds. For a plate reverb, I go for a lot of plates on vocals just because of the way the reflections are. But this one gives you quite a good amount of control over the plate. In one way, good or bad, because you can make too many mistakes then. But it's pretty straightforward. So you've got pre-delay, you've got plate tension, which is how tight the steel is. You've got the type of steel, so this is gold, or metal, I should say. Then you've got the plate area, so the dimensions of the plate. You've got aspect ratio, and you've got filters here, so you can use dry, the signal dry, or the plate level. And then you can do gain reduction, cut off frequencies, and it's also got the filtering visually here as well. Shows you the in and out. So it's kind of a neat plugin. Like I said, I'll show you some more in-depth stuff on that as another additional review for this. But let's have a listen to what it sounds like and work from there. So I'll just play the plate reverb on its own.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it, drown the sorrow.
Now you can hear I've got the snare in there as well. So there's different aspects of the mix that I threw in this particular plate reverb that I wanted, because I wanted the entire mix to sit in a space. So that's just that. I'll get to that in a later stage of this review and show you guys kind of why I did that. But the main things about this is I've got, first off, an EQ. So I've got the Pro Q3 removing some of the lows and some of the highs, and that's pretty much leaving the mid section there for the reverb to work with. Then I've got the reverb itself, which it has its own filter, but I want to filter the stuff going into it first. So I then put another filter here, similar kind of scenario going on there, and dipped out some of this stuff in the high end stuff there. The plate reverb is set to standard plate, which then you can see all the settings here, 33 milliseconds of pre-delay and all that other stuff I showed you guys just before. And then I've got track spacer at the end here, which is kind of a secret weapon when it comes to mixing the track. It definitely does help you remove frequencies that you don't want in there, like a sidechain sort of thing. And that's kind of what I use for my reverbs as well as other instruments. So I'll show you what that's doing there. So the vocal itself isn't actually using the track spacer. What it's doing, it's pretty much pushing the reverb out of the way as the instrument plays itself. So for example, the kick, when the kick plays, the reverb gets pushed out of the way, and I'll just show you, I should show you track spacer so you can see that. So let's play it and you'll see kind of what I mean.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it, drown the sorrows in the gin.
Now that's allowing each instrument, for example, the kick, the snare, whatever I've used as a source to this track spacer. So I can go in here, I can actually isolate what I want on this. So I put the main vox of each part. So I didn't do it individually, but I used the main bus. So this is kind of where buses really come into play, as far as using buses for your drums, your vocals, your instruments, all that sort of stuff. And I've got a bus here for the main vox here, and then I've used track spacer on this one, which is all of the vocals together combined to push out the reverb of that particular reverb. So if I just isolate this and this, I'll show you what it sounds like.
Can't you see your value, baby girl? Your worth's priceless. Not a lot of people know it, but she's hurting deep within. Have a hard time trying to show it, drown the sorrows in the gin. Father absent from the home as a young girl growing up. Mama left the struggle, all these strange men showing up. Angered as a child, when she's older, repeats the cycle. Searching for acceptance, not knowing it's really vital that she...
So you can kind of hear how much that actually does for the actual track. It's pretty amazing, because what it's allowing the vocal to do, it's allowing the vocal to push the reverb out of the way as the vocal comes in. As soon as the vocal leaves, then the reverb tail continues on. So it helps you not build up frequencies inside of the mix, so that later on, all the things, you know, as everything builds up inside the mix, it starts to add up. And then at the end, if you have too much crowding in one space, then you're going to have an issue with the final mix, the master, and all that sort of stuff. So it's allowing my vocal to come into the reverb, but still not take up space inside the mix when it's actually playing. So hopefully you guys enjoy these tips. I'm sure there's a lot of things I can show you inside of this mix that will really help you guys achieve good things in your own mixes, and just help you, work with what your own tracks are working with. That sort of scenario there with the track spacer doesn't always have to be with vocals. It can be with anything like instruments, kick, snare, whatever. You can see here I've got a whole bunch of track spacers happening with the kick. So that's really, really a helpful technique that I use inside of Studio One. I know other DAWs do it. Logic, you can do this. Anything you can do it in. Any time where you can sidechain, you can do that. So hopefully you guys enjoy these tips. If you do, remember to like, subscribe, and make your comments down below about what you do for mixing. And we'll chat in the comments below, and hope to see you guys in the next video. Peace out.